Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So John was sitting in his favorite bar, drinking beer and reading the newspaper. Suddenly, his friend Tom came running towards him, panting and out of breath. Tom was usually a calm and collected individual, so John was taken aback by the panic in his friend's voice. "John, quick. Your wife is cheating on you with your best friend in the forest," Tom exclaimed. John's eyes widened in shock and anger. He immediately got up from his seat, threw some money on the table, and sprinted out of the bar, determined to catch them red-handed. He made his way to the nearby forest, his heart pounding with rage. A few moments later, he returned and calmly sat back down in his chair. The people in the bar and the guy who told him were confused and asked what had happened. So John said he was just exaggerating. Firstly, it was just a couple of trees. He made it out like it was a forest. Secondly, "Best friend," he says. "It turns out I don't even know the guy." So a man goes to the doctor and says, "Doctor, my wife is cheating on me." Every evening, she goes to Larry's bar and picks up men. In fact, she sleeps with anybody who asks her. I'm going crazy. What do you think I should do? Relax, says the doctor. Take a deep breath and calm down. Now, tell me, exactly where is Larry's bar? So, a recently married woman, a bit suspicious of her husband, hired a private detective to follow him. After a week, the detective reported that he had tracked her husband into 4 bars and a bachelor's apartment. "Aha," she exclaimed. "I knew that skunk was cheating on me. Go on, what was he doing in those places?" Embarrassed and with a halting voice, the detective said, "Miss, he was trailing you." So 2 rednecks were sitting around talking one afternoon over a cold beer. After a while, Billy says to the Cletus, "If I was to sneak over to your house and shag your wife while you were off fishing, and she got pregnant and had a baby, would that make us related?" Cletus crooked his head sideways for a minute, scratched his head, and squinted his eyes, thinking real hard about the question. Finally, he says, "Well, I don't know about being related, but it would make us even." So a female veterinarian lay awake at night, unable to fall asleep. Her conscience and her mind began a heated debate. The conscience whispered, "How can you even think of sleeping after being unfaithful to your husband?" The mind retorted, "Oh, please. It's not that simple. If your husband is always busy and never has time for intimacy, even the most faithful wife might stray." The conscience protested, "But cheating is one thing, sleeping with a patient, that's just unprofessional." The mind calmly replied, "Really? Remember Mary from the hospital nearby? She sleeps with her patients all the time, and everyone is happy." For a moment, the conscience went silent. The woman finally began to drift off. But just as sleep was about to take her, the conscience whispered sarcastically, "Sure, but Mary isn't a veterinarian." So, a police officer was on patrol at night and saw 2 men fighting in the middle of the street. He flashed his police lights, hopped out the car, and pulled the 2 men apart. He cuffed them both and sat them apart from each other on the sidewalk. "Explain what is going on here," the policeman asked the first man. "Well," the first man sighed, "it all started a few nights ago when I thought my girlfriend was cheating on me. I came around to her place to surprise her and found her watching a movie with 2 suspiciously empty pizza boxes next to her. She said she was just hungry. But who the hell orders 2 large pizzas to themselves?" A valid point. The policeman nodded, agreeing. "Anyway," the first man continued, I decided to stake out her house. So I'm waiting here out in the street, watching to see if anyone goes into that pink house on the other side of the road. I have my mate at the pizza shop deliver me a pizza while I wait. Everything's quiet, and I'm just about to start eating my pizza until I see that bastard over there come creeping around the side of the house. That man over there? The policeman asked. Yes. So naturally, I confronted him, and he denied seeing my girl. Next thing you know, we're in the middle of a brawl, and then you arrive. The policeman thought for a moment, then undid the cuffs. Here's the deal. You give me your pizza, and I'll let you drive away with a warning. The first man nodded grumpily, hopped in his car, and drove off. The policeman placed the pizza in his car, and then walked over to the second man. That guy says you were cheating on his girlfriend, the policeman stated. How dare he insult my honor like that? The second man roared. So, what were you doing? The policeman asked. Well, trying to rob the place. The second man mumbled, but I couldn't get in. That's hardly any better, the policeman replied. The windows were locked up tight, so I decided to give up. Next thing I know, some guy is screaming at me, saying I'm having a thing with his girl. We ended up in a fight. Then you turn up. Empty your pockets, the policeman said. The second man pulled out a pair of diamond earrings from another house he had robbed. I'll take those, the policeman said. But because I'm in a good mood, I'll let you go. The second man couldn't believe his luck. He skipped away down the street. Suddenly, the lights at the front of the pink house turned on. A woman came marching out. What the hell is going on out here? The policeman turned around and said, Nothing, babe. I've got you a pizza and some new earrings. So, a man returning home a day early from a business trip got into a taxi at the airport late at night. It was well past midnight, and the streets were quiet. On the way home, the man turned to the cab driver and asked, Hey, can I count on you to be a witness? I think my wife might be cheating on me, and I want to catch her in the act. The cab driver, intrigued, nodded and said, For $100, I'm in. When they arrived at the house, the two of them tiptoed inside and crept up to the bedroom. The husband quietly opened the door, flipped on the light, yanked back the blanket, and sure enough, there was his wife in bed with another man. Furious, the husband pulled out a gun and aimed it at the naked man's head. His wife screamed, Wait! Don't do it. This man has been incredibly generous. I lied when I told you I inherited money. He's the one who bought you that Corvette. He paid for our new cabin cruiser, our house by the lake, and even our country club membership. He covers all the monthly dues. The husband stood there, stunned, his hand trembling. Slowly, he lowered the gun. He turned to the cab driver and asked, What would you do? The cab driver scratched his head and replied, I'd cover him up with that blanket before he catches a cold. So a guy suspects his wife is cheating on him, so he comes home early from work one day. His wife meets him at the door in a bathrobe, her hair a mess. Where is he? He demands. Where's the guy who's been sleeping with you? I don't know what you're talking about, dear, she answers. So the guy tears the house apart looking for him. Finally, he's on the second floor in the kitchen. He looks out the window and sees a guy sitting in a Tesla. That's him, the guy thinks. That's the guy who's been sleeping with my wife. He's so furious, he picks up the refrigerator, throws it out the window, has a heart attack, and dies. St. Peter meets him at the gates of heaven. Why are you here? He asks, and the guy answers, I knew my wife was cheating on me, so I came home early. I saw her boyfriend sitting in his Tesla out on the street, threw the refrigerator at him, had a heart attack, and died. St. Peter scowls and says, "You don't belong here. Go to hell." He pulls a big lever, a trap door opens, and the guy disappears. A couple of minutes later, another guy comes up to St. Peter at the gates of heaven. "What are you doing here?" St. Peter asks, and the guy answers, "I don't know. I was just sitting in my Tesla, minding my own business, when somebody threw a refrigerator at me." St. Peter wags his finger at him and says, "I heard about you. You go to hell too." He pulls the big lever, the trap door opens, and the guy disappears. A couple of minutes later, another guy comes up to St. Peter at the gates of heaven. "What are you doing here?" St. Peter asks, and the guy answers, "I don't know. I was just sitting in a refrigerator, minding my own business." So once upon a time, 3 men met an untimely demise in a car crash while en route to a conference. As they ascended to the pearly gates, they were greeted by St. Peter, who would determine their eternal rewards based on their earthly deeds. St. Peter met the first man and said, "You lived a good life, were honest in your dealings, generous to others. I will go get you your reward." He returned in a few minutes with a drop-dead, beautiful woman and announced, "This is your eternal reward." St. Peter then turned to the next man and said, "You were a wicked, cheating, no good man. I'll be back with your reward." He returned a few minutes later with a nasty woman, half her hair missing, only a few rotting teeth, and announced, "This is your eternal reward." A final man anxiously looked to St. Peter, who only shook his head at him and said, "I'll be back." He returned with an even more beautiful woman than the first. The man exclaimed, "Wow, was I really that righteous?" St. Peter then turned to the woman while pointing to the man and said to her, "And here is your eternal reward." So a blonde suspected her boyfriend of cheating, so she decided to buy a gun. One day, she shows up at his apartment unexpectedly, opens the door, and finds him in the arms of a redhead. Furious, she reaches into her purse, pulls out the gun, and, overwhelmed with emotion, points it at her own head. Her boyfriend panics and shouts, "No, honey, don't do it." The blonde glares at him and says, "Oh, shut up. You're next." So a married man decided to work late to be with his young secretary, so he called his wife to make up an excuse. After work, he invited his secretary to dinner. It soon became obvious that he was going to get lucky, so the two went back to her apartment and made love for 2 hours. Afterward, the fellow went to the bathroom to straighten up for the trip home and noticed a huge hickey on his neck. He panicked, wondering what he was going to tell his wife. After the man unlocked his front door, his dog came bounding to greet him. The man thought for a moment and promptly fell to the carpet, pretending to fight off the affectionate animal. Holding his neck with one hand, he said, "Honey, look what the dog did to my neck." "Hell, that's nothing," she answered, ripping open her blouse. "Look at what he did to my breasts." So a woman found out her husband was cheating, so she grabbed a large knife, intending to cut off his manhood while he slept. She lifted the blanket and raised the knife over her head, but as she swung it down, he moved slightly and she ended up chopping off his leg instead. The husband called the police, and they arrested her for assault and attempted murder. But given all the circumstances, the judge decided that she was only guilty of a misdemeanor. So a New York attorney representing a wealthy art collector called and asked to speak to his client. "John, I have some good news and I have some bad news." The art collector replied, "You know, I've had an awful day, Jack. So let's hear the good news first." The lawyer said, "Well, I met with your wife today, and she informed me that she has invested only $5,000 in two very nice pictures that she thinks will bring somewhere between $15 and $20 million. And I think she could be right." John replied enthusiastically, "Holy cow! Well done. My wife is a brilliant businesswoman, isn't she? You've just made my day. Now, I know I can handle the bad news." "What is it?" "The pictures are of you and your secretary." So the secretary of a high-priced lawyer announced to him the arrival of a new client, a gorgeous, young, blonde woman. The woman was seated and said, "I want a divorce." "On what grounds?" asked the lawyer. "Infidelity. I don't think my husband has been faithful to me." "What makes you think that?" asked the lawyer. "Well," replied the blonde woman, "I don't think he's the father of my child." So one evening, Harold and Carol were celebrating their 40 years of marriage. When Harold decided to ask Carol a question that had been weighing on his mind for a long time. "Carol, we've had such a wonderful life together, full of contentment and blessings. But there's something I've always wondered about. Tell me the truth. Have you ever been unfaithful to me?" Carol hesitated for a moment before finally responding, "Yes, Harold, 3 times. Harold was shocked and asked her to explain. Carol took a deep breath and began, "Do you remember right after we were married, when we were struggling financially and the bank was about to foreclose on our house?" Harold nodded, remembering the difficult times. Carol continued, "Well, after I went to see the banker one night, the next day the bank extended our loan." Harold was shocked, but he understood that Carol had acted out of love for him and their future together. Carol went on to describe a second instance. "Remember when you almost died from a heart problem and we couldn't afford the operation?" Harold nodded, the memory still vivid in his mind. Carol continued, "Well, after I went to see the doctor, he performed the operation for free." Again, Harold was shocked, but he forgave Carol for her actions, which were driven by love for him. Finally, Carol told the third story. "Do you remember when you ran for president of your golf club and needed 14 more votes?" So a guy goes to the supermarket and spots an attractive woman waving at him. She says hello, and he's a bit taken aback. He can't place where he knows her from. "So," he asks, "do you know me?" She replies, "I think you're the father of one of my kids." His mind races, flashing back to the only time he's ever been unfaithful to his wife. He says, "Oh my God, are you the stripper from my bachelor party who I made love to on the pool table with all my buddies watching while your partner whipped me with wet celery?" She stares at him, pauses, then says, "No, I'm your son's teacher." So a woman comes home early and finds her husband in bed with a girl. She is furious, threatens to beat them both up. The husband says, "Believe me, darling, this is just a misunderstanding. I was driving home and saw this young lady trying to catch a ride. So I decided to give her a lift. I ask her where she needs to go, and she tells me she wants to visit some relatives, but isn't sure about their address. So I took her home so she could check our phone book. Once there, I saw her dress is pretty ragged, so I decided to give her your old dress. Nearly 2 years that it's been hanging in the closet and you never wore it. Then I saw her shoes are also about to fall apart. So I gave her your old shoes, which have been doing nothing but collecting dust for 3 years. Of course, she said thanks, and then asked, "Excuse me, sir, but is there anything else in this house your wife never uses?" So when Bubba and Daisy first got married, Bubba said, "I'm putting a box under the bed. You must promise never to look in it." In all their 10 years of marriage, Daisy had never looked. However, on the afternoon of their 10th anniversary, curiosity got the best of her, and she lifted the lid and peeked inside. In the box were 3 empty beer cans and $81,874.25 in cash. She closed the box and put it back under the bed. Now that she knew what was in the box, she was doubly curious as to why there even was such a box with such contents. That evening, they were out for a special anniversary dinner. After dinner, Daisy could no longer contain her curiosity, and she confessed, saying, "I am so sorry. For all these years, I kept my promise and never looked into the box under our bed. However, today, the temptation was too much, and I gave in. But now, I need to know, why do you keep the 3 beer cans in the box?" Bubba thought for a while and said, "I guess after all these years you deserve to know the truth. Whenever I was unfaithful to you, I put an empty beer can in the box under the bed to remind myself not to do it again." Daisy was shocked, but said, "I am very disappointed and saddened by your behavior. However, since you are addicted to sex, I guess it does happen, and I guess 3 times is not that bad considering your problem." Bubba thanked her for being so understanding. They hugged and made their peace. A little while later, Daisy asked Bubba, "So why do you have all that money in the box?" Bubba answered, "Well, whenever the box filled up with empty cans, I took them to the recycling center and redeemed them for cash." So a priest wants to go on vacation. So he calls his rabbi friend and asks if he would handle his parish for a month. The rabbi replies, "I guess I can definitely handle the sermons, as I'll just preach from the Old Testament, but I wouldn't have a clue what to do with the confessional." "Confessions are easy," the priest says. "Just watch me and you'll get the idea." So the priest goes in the confession box and a woman comes up. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I slept with 2 men." The priest replies, "Say 2 Hail Marys, put $1 in the collection box, and you will be forgiven." The woman thanks him and leaves. The next woman comes up. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I slept with 2 men." The priest replies, "Say 2 Hail Marys, put $1 in the collection box, and you will be forgiven." The woman thanks him and leaves. The next woman approaches. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I slept with 2 men." The priest replies, "Say 2 Hail Marys, put $1 in the collection box, and you will be forgiven." The woman thanks him and leaves. "This is easy," the rabbi says. "I can handle it. You take the next one, and I'll watch." The priest replies. So the rabbi goes in the confession box, and the next woman approaches. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I slept with a man." The rabbi replies, "So sleep with another. They're 2 for $1. So after watching a story of an emperor on TV, a 5-year-old boy told his mom, "Mom, I also want 7 wives. 1 will cook for me. 1 will read for me. 1 will go for a walk with me. 1 will sing for me. 1 can bath me." Mom smiled and said, "Then nighttime, I don't have to accompany you to sleep." After some thought, Son said, "Not possible. I still want to sleep with you, Mummy." Mom's eyes fill up with tears of happiness. "My sweet son. Then who will sleep with your 7 wives?" The kid replied, "Let them sleep with Daddy." Dad's eyes fill up with tears of happiness. "My sweet son." So a middle-aged woman sought help from her doctor. "All my husband does is complain that I never want to sleep with him. And he's right too. I have no desire at all." The doctor gave her a prescription and told her to return for a visit in 2 weeks. After the 2 weeks were up, she bounced, smiling, into his office. "Those pills were great, Doc. I'm doing it twice a night now." "That's wonderful," said the doctor. "What does your husband say now?" "How should I know?" she replied. "I ain't been home yet." So arriving home early from work, a husband found his wife in bed with another man. "Wait a minute," exclaimed the husband. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" "See," said the wife, looking at her lover. "I told you he was stupid." So Fred always looked on the bright side. He would constantly irritate his friends with his eternal optimism. No matter how horrible the circumstance, he would always reply, "It could have been worse." To cure him of his annoying habit, his friends decided to invent a situation so completely bad, so terrible, that even Fred could find no hope in it. On the golf course one day, one of them said, "Fred, did you hear about Tom? He came home last night, found his wife in bed with another man, shot them both, and then turned the gun on himself." "That's awful," said Fred, "but it could have been worse." "How?" asked his angry friend. "Could it have been worse?" "Well," replied Fred, "if it had happened the night before, I'd be dead now." So 3 women worked in the same office under the same female boss who had a habit of leaving work early every day. One day, the women decided that when the boss left, they would leave too. After all, she never called or came back to work, so how would she know they went home early? The brunette was thrilled to be home early. She did some gardening, spent quality time with her son, and went to bed early. The redhead was elated to squeeze in a quick workout at the spa before meeting a dinner date. The blonde was happy to get home early and surprise her husband. But when she arrived, she heard a muffled noise coming from inside her bedroom. Slowly and quietly, she cracked open the door and was mortified to see her husband in bed with her boss. Gently, she closed the door and crept out of her house. The next day, during their coffee break, the brunette and redhead mentioned they planned to leave early again, and they asked the blonde if she was going to join them. "No way," she said. "I almost got caught yesterday." So a wife is in bed with her exhausted lover when her husband suddenly rushes in unexpectedly. Panicking, the wife yells to her lover, "Quick, show him that you're a real man." The lover, utterly shocked, gasps, "What? To him too?" So late one night, a married woman is in bed with her husband's best friend when her phone suddenly vibrates. She answers and hangs up after a short conversation. Her lover, sensing the unease that had enveloped the room, inquired with a hint of concern, "Who was that, my dear?" The woman hesitated for a moment, a mixture of guilt and amusement dancing in her eyes. Finally, she confessed, "That was just my husband." The friend's eyes widened in disbelief, his mind racing to grasp the implications of her revelation. "Oh, shit," he exclaimed, his voice tinged with panic. "Is he coming home?" But the wife reassured him, "Don't worry. He said he'll be at the bar with you for a couple more hours. So one day, Jack and Andy arrived at Andy's house and heard some peculiar noises emanating from Andy's bedroom upstairs. Startled and intrigued, they tiptoed up the stairs and cautiously peered through the slightly ajar door. To their astonishment, they discovered the milkman in bed with Jack's girlfriend. They retreated silently, their minds brimming with mixed emotions, and sought solace in the confines of the kitchen. Andy was seething with fury, his anger palpable. In a fit of rage, he yanked open the refrigerator door, snatched 2 frosty bottles of beer, and handed one to Jack, his longtime friend. Both men took a few sips in somber silence, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. Sensing Andy's resentment, Jack finally mustered the courage to address the elephant in the room, saying, "I apologize for this unfortunate situation. But what about that milkman?" Andy, his voice tinged with bitterness, replied curtly, "What about him? Let him fetch his own darn beer."